Hi, everybody. It's meteorologist Joe Cioffi, and just to prove to you that it's not always all about weather, it's Sunday in my house, and everybody's out for the moment, which is good because then it allows me to play in the kitchen. And I'm going to show you how to make some really good meatballs, all right? And for you guys out there, cooking is really easy. You know, if you have extra virgin olive oil, garlic, granulated garlic, paprika, and coarse kosher salt, you know, you really have everything that you need. So I'm going to just show you. I started off with 6 eggs and, you know, just kind of beat them here for a little while. You don't want to overdo it, but just kind of get them all pretty well good and mixed in. And then I put in parsley, okay? And I use fresh parsley, and I chop it up, and we put it in there, and, you know, continue to mix it. You know, you want to just kind of give it a little bit of time to absorb some flavor. And this is all really, you know, pretty easy stuff to do, and you can make some great meatballs and just basically blow people away with how really good they taste. And the next thing I do is I put in some grated Parmigiano Reggiano cheese. Now, some people like to use Locatelli. Some people like to use pecorino cheese. What I like to do is I like to use 2 different kinds of cheeses, because I like the extra flavor. And, you know, there's no right or wrong amount. This is one of these things where it kind of you figure it out. Sometimes I put a little bit of more of one thing versus the other, and I don't use exact measurements here. You know, this way, every time I make them, they come out and they taste a little different, and I learn, you know, new things about this. So, you know, you get the cheese in there. So I'm going to use, you know, the Parmigiano Reggiano. Now, just for speed purposes, I'm using, you know, putting in granulated garlic. And, you know, I put in enough where, you know, I can kind of sort of smell the flavor a little bit. You know, keep mixing it all in. And then the next thing I add is a little bit of paprika. I put in enough to that, you know, when you put it over the top, that it turns red. And, you know, then continue to mix in. I love paprika. I love the flavor of it and how it makes foods taste. So I use that. It's just a little bit of an unorthodox recipe. It's not as truly traditional Italian. I kind of ad-libbed it along the way. And the next thing, you know, I use coarse kosher salt as opposed to you can use regular salt. I got to get the lid open. There we go. So I use coarse kosher salt. And, you know, I just kind of put it in there. A couple of, you know, couple of pinches there. Mix it in. And you could always add salt later on according to whatever your tastes are. Okay. Now, the next thing is, now this is Italian. This is pancetta, which is basically an Italian bacon and has a lot of flavor. It's very thick. And I mix that in there. And here we go. So that's all mixed in. And the one thing I add, now you could use either whole milk or you know, a little bit of cream. I use half and half, and I add some half and half, maybe about half a cup to a cup, because that gives it a lot of body and moisture, you know, which is really, really important. Now, from here, the next to last thing that I add, you want this mixed up really well. It's kind of like a batter. Now, at this point, we start to add we add breadcrumbs. The last thing we're going to put in is meat. Now, I like meatballs that have meat in them. You know, sometimes when you buy these sort of store-bought pre-made ones, they have more breadcrumbs than anything else, and then you're just basically eating a bread ball. You know, how I do this is put in enough breadcrumbs so that when you mix it all up together, it becomes, you don't want it too thick, okay? And you don't want it watery either. So this is, you know, you want it kind of pasty. And this is, you know, the outcome here. And the last thing that goes in is the meat, okay? And I use pork and ground chuck, all right? You want to use ground chuck because ground chuck has more fat content to it, and the more fat content the meat has, the better it tastes. You know, if you put ground sirloin, or if you use a 95% lean or whatever it is, it tastes like cardboard. All right, you want that fat in there because that's what makes fat is what makes foods taste good. And then I also use ground pork. Okay, you can use veal. My problem with veal is I like veal, but it's very lean. It's extremely lean, and it doesn't. I find that there's flavor lost to it, so you're spending an extra $1 or $2 a pound for something that really isn't giving you any flavor. So just go with the ground beef and the ground chuck, and I start to mix the meat in, and I'm going to do that, and we're going to then I'll do that now, and I do in chunks. A little, you know, puts a handful of ground chuck, a handful of ground pork. Keep stirring and stirring until the whole thing is blended in. Okay, so I mixed everything up together, and just one of the things that sometimes happens is, and this time around it didn't happen, but when you mix it in, if it looks like it's too wet, okay, then you can add more breadcrumbs. I use about 1.25 pounds of each meat. This will make about 36 to 40 meatballs, depending on the size you make your meatballs. But if it looks like you're